Welcome to Art 305, Art and Mass Culture. This is another illustrated lecture about the preface. Let's continue to look at some of the theoreticians Dr. Brown mentions in the preface of her book. John Berger wrote a very famous book called Ways of Seeing. In 1972, British art historian John Berger published a small, richly illustrated book inspired by his four-part BBC television series entitled Ways of Seeing. Berger says that, quote, an image is a sight which has been recreated or reproduced. So, someone, an artist, sees something in the world and then recreates or reproduces what they see. They make an image. Berger continues, quote, it is an appearance or a set of appearances which has been detached from the place and time in which it first made its appearance and preserved for a few minutes or a few centuries. Berger brings up the fact that images get preserved and seen again at different times, maybe years or hundreds of years or thousands of years after they were first made. Berger began his discussion by establishing the primacy of vision. For him, vision is very important. He says, quote, it is seeing which establishes our place in the surrounding world. Quote, we explain that world with words, but words can never undo the fact that we are surrounded by it. And many of us, unless we're vision impaired, see that we are surrounded by the world. Then he asserted that human sight is intelligent. Quote, he says, quote, the way we see things is affected by what we know or what we believe. Berger says, quote, every image embodies a way of seeing. Every image embodies a way of seeing, even a photograph. So while we may think that we just take our cameras and point and shoot a photograph, Berger says that the way we see is affected by what we know and what we believe. Let's talk about the relationship between an original and a copy. Berger talks about the relationship between an original and a copy, and we're going to look at this in the context of a piece of artwork called Coatlicue. Take a look at this small photograph of a sculpture. Now, some of you may be familiar with Coatlicue, but for others of you, you may never have seen this object before. What are we looking at here? Are we actually looking at a sculpture, at an original image? No. We are looking at a photograph, a digital reproduction of the original photograph of a sculpture. So several generations removed from the original. And from this, we can get very little information about what the object really is, and almost no information about what this was originally used for. In reality, this densely carved colossal sculpture stands 8 feet tall and pitches forward, towering over its viewer and giving the impression that it is advancing forward. Berger points out a few things about the difference between an original image and a copy. These points are based on a famous essay from 1935 by German critic Walter Benjamin. Before the invention of photography, so before photography was invented, before we had cameras, before we had photographs, how could we actually see this massive sculpture of Coatlicue? We would have to actually travel to the place where the sculpture was located. Or someone could make a drawing. We could look at a drawing of it. Here we get a sense of how massive this sculpture really is. We can see the viewers who are looking at it and how big it is and how much taller than they are the sculpture is. Before photography, we couldn't see an image unless we traveled to the location of the image. And in the case of Coatlicue, we still don't entirely understand the function of this sculpture of the Aztec goddess. For Berger, the original sculpture, in its original location, and viewed by a member of the Aztec society which made this sculpture, caused it to have a certain aura, a certain power to it, which is now lost by looking at this little tiny photograph of the sculpture. Such original artworks have a kind of aura that was inherent in the direct experience of the art, in standing in front of this massive sculpture. In our mass media society, the experience of the artwork is distorted and diminished by multiple reproductions. If you can, take out your phone right now or use your device to Google Coatlicue. So just pull out your phone or your laptop or your tablet and just Google Coatlicue. How long does it take to bring up many, many, many reproductions of this statue, right? Tons of images there. We have almost instant access to billions of images on the internet. Now, imagine being in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. So you're transported to Mexico City, you're in the National Museum of Anthropology, and you're standing right in front of this massive sculpture. Would that feel different than looking at the little photo of the statue on your phone? Now imagine being a member of Aztec society, 1,000 years ago, standing in front of this statue in the year it was first made. How are those experiences different? Can you tell that those three experiences are all very different? Berger says, quote, "This surrender of the once vital and eminent is the inevitable legacy of instant access to the art object, and when it is mass reproduced, its aura is lost and the link with its observer diluted." In other words, just because we can instantly Google an image and see it doesn't mean that we haven't lost something in the translation of that reproduction. As Berger noted, reproduction makes it, quote, "possible, even inevitable, that an image will be used for many different purposes, and that the reproduced image, unlike the original work, can lend itself to all of them." So here I am using this image for this slide lecture, which is so different than the original purpose for which it was first made. All right, so we're going to move on to a second point that John Berger makes. How do visual images reinforce gendered differences? Today, we are much more accustomed to recognizing the ways that visual images in advertising, movies, and social media often reinforce inequity in the ways that different genders are represented. However, John Berger was one of the first popular theoreticians to speak about these differences and to point them out in historical contexts. Berger analyzed the difference in European depictions of men and women. In general, he asserted that men act and women appear. And obviously we've come a long way and we're really breaking these stereotypes today, but it was very important that he pointed these things out. Men are urged to strive for power, which they exercise over others. A woman's presence is intrinsic to her person. Her sense of being is based on how she is appreciated by others. Berger investigated how men is presented as the surveyor and women as the survey. Men do the looking and women are looked at in these paintings. On the left, you have Susannah and the Elders. This is a biblical tale of a group of elderly men who spy upon a young woman in the bath. And on the right, you have the Judgment of Paris, which is a mythological story of a man who judges which woman is most beautiful. There they are spying on her. she's obviously, vulnerable. She's nude. They're dressed. They're doing the looking, and she is being looked at. And again, here we have a man who's in a position of power, judging the beauty of these different women. John Berger concluded this part of his argument by asserting that, quote, the ideal spectator is always assumed to be male, and the image of the woman is designed to flatter him. He suggested that dubious readers try inverting the gender of a scantily clad female model in any ad and experience the shock of seeing a man in the role of object. And art historian Linda Nochlin performed this exercise in her memorable Buy Some Bananas. So here she kind of reverses the role and puts the man in the position of being looked at. And obviously, she's making a joke here. All right, and the last thing we're going to talk about from Berger is how do advertising images affect us? After surveying the tradition of European oil painting, Berger drew a crucial distinction between such paintings and contemporary advertising images. And again, this is back in the 70s, but it's still an important point to make. Historically, oil paintings showed what the owner already possessed. They consolidated his sense of his own value. In contrast, ads make viewers dissatisfied with their present lives. Ads suggest that if viewers buy the featured commodity, their lives will be better. Ads offer alternatives to what viewers are. And Berger's book is a powerful assertion of the need to analyze our mass media environment. He says, quote, in no other form of society in history has there been such a concentration of images, such a density of visual messages. We are now so accustomed to being addressed by these images that we scarcely notice their total impact. So again, he's asking us to not, just see these images, but to think about what they mean to us. He cautioned that advertising, quote, adds up to a kind of philosophical system. It explains everything in its own terms. It interprets the world. All right, so there's the end of this short lecture on the theories of John Berger.